Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Thank you for joining us today in the study of Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th Canto, Chapter 8, the story of Piṅgalā. Hare Krishna. Please join us for little Hari Nam. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari, Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari, Yashodanandana Vrajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Mangalacharan prayers together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiriyet Shravatam Swakatha Krishna Punya Shavana Kirtanaha Hridayantasto Bhadrani Vidunoti Suhasatam Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Ruttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhakti Nashtiki. Hare Krishna. So today we will be covering Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th Canto, Chapter 8. The story of Piṅgalā. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. So this is part of UDDHAVA Gita, 3rd chapter in UDDHAVA Gita and 8th chapter in Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th Canto. The story of Piṅgalā. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Please join us in the recitation of first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th Canto, Chapter 8. The story of Piṅgalā. Shri Brahmanu Vacha.
Shri Brahmanu Vacha.
Sukham Endriyakam Rajan.
Sukham Endriyam Kam Rajan.
Swarge Naraka Evacha.
Swarge Narake Vacha.
Dehinam Yadyatha Dukkham.
Dehinam Yadyatha Dukham.
Tasmane Cheta Tadbuddha.
Tasmane Chet Tadbuddha.
Please.
Shri Brahman Uvacha.
Shri Brahman Uvacha.
Sukhamendriyam Sukhamendriyakam Rajan.
Sukham Indriyakam Rajan.
Swarge Narake Vacha.
Swarge Naraka Evacha.
Dehinam Yadyatha Dukham.
Dehinam Yadyatha Dukkham.
Tasmane Chet Tadbuddha.
Tasmane Cheta Tadbuddha. Shri Brahmana Uvacha.
Shri Brahmana Vacha.
The saintly Brahman said,
The saintly Brahman said,
Sukham,
Sukham,
happiness.
happiness.
Indriyakam,
Indriyakam,
generated from the material senses.
generated from the material senses.
Rajan,
Rajan,
O king.
O king.
Swarge,
Swarge,
in material heaven.
in material heaven.
Narake,
Narake,
in hell.
in hell.
Eva,
Eva,
certainly.
certainly.
Cha,
Cha,
also.
also.
Dehinam,
Dehina,
of the embodied living beings.
of the embodied living beings.
Yat,
Yat,
since.
since.
Yatha,
Yatha,
just as.
just as.
Dukkham,
Dukham,
unhappiness.
unhappiness.
Tasmat,
Tasmat,
therefore.
therefore.
Na,
Na,
not.
not.
Icheta,
Icheta,
should desire.
should desire.
Tat,
Tat,
that.
that.
Buddha,
Buddha,
one who knows.
one who knows.
Translation by the disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The saintly Brahman said, O king, the embodied living entity automatically experiences unhappiness in heaven or hell. Similarly, happiness will also be experienced, even without one's seeking it. Therefore, a person of intelligent determination does not make any endeavor to obtain such material happiness. Purport: one should not uselessly waste his life pursuing material sense gratification, because a specific quantity of material happiness will automatically come to one as a result of one's past and present fruitive activities. This lesson is learned from the Ajgar or Python, who lies down and accepts for his maintenance whatever comes of its own accord. Remarkably, in both material heaven and hell, happiness and unhappiness come automatically due to our previous activities, although the proportions of happiness and unhappiness certainly vary. Either in heaven or in hell, one may eat, drink, sleep, or have sex life. But these activities being based on the material body are temporary and inconsequential. An intelligent person should see that even the best material situation is actually a punishment for previous unlawful activities executed outside the scope of loving devotional service to God. A conditioned soul undergoes great trouble to obtain a little happiness. After struggling in material life, which is full of hardship and hypocrisy, one may receive a little sense gratification. But this illusory pleasure in no way offsets the burden of suffering one must bear to obtain it. After all, a pretty hat is no cure for a homely face. If one really wants to solve one's problems, one should live simply and reserve a major portion of one's life for loving service to Krishna. Even those who do not serve God receive a certain standard of maintenance from Him. Therefore, he can just imagine the security the Lord offers to those who dedicate their lives to His devotional service. Unrefined, fruity workers foolishly worry only about the present life, whereas the more pious karmis imprudently make elaborate arrangements for future material sense gratification, unaware that all such enjoyment is temporary. The real solution, however, is to understand that by pleasing the personality of Godhead, who is the master of all senses and all desires, one can attain permanent happiness. Such knowledge easily solves the problems of life. Hare Krishna. Please join us for Guru Pranati. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatya Deshitarine Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yat Kripa Tadham Vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavata 11th Canto, chapters 6 through 29, they are part of Uddhava Gita. So Lord Krishna is giving instructions to Uddhav. And this is chapter 8 of 11th Canto, the story of Piṅgalā. And today we will be covering 4 instructing spiritual masters of Avadhuta Brahman. And who is this Avadhuta Brahman? None other than Lord Dattatreya, a plenary portion of Lord Shri Krishna. And so today we'll be covering the instructions he took from, using his intelligence. It's not that these instructing spiritual masters spoke to him. Rather, he observed them, and using his own intelligence, he's identifying that he was able to derive these instructions. The python, the ocean, moth and honeybee. So we will learn more about these 4 gurus in Lord's creation. So there are 24 various elements of creation that have been identified, and we had covered the 8 of such as instructing spiritual masters as gurus in the previous chapter. Who were they? Earth, air, sky, water, fire, moon, sun and the foolish pigeon. So earth, what did Avadhuta Brahman reveals to who? He is speaking to Yadu Maharaj. And he's saying that from earth he learned how to be sober and tolerant. And Avadhut Brahman, when he is speaking this to Yadu Maharaj, this story is being narrated by who? This is being described by Lord Krishna to Uddhav, to enable him to take to his instructions to leave Dwaraka and go to Badrika Ashram, and how to be carefree in the mood of that Avadhuta Brahman. So to be able to follow those instructions and be transcendentally situated and not be disturbed by the various auspicious and inauspicious activities that are going on. And the age of Kali, he is describing to Uddhav that people will be performing all kind of sinful activities, yet staying unattached. He has to engage in devotional service. So this is Vani Seva Uddhav is going to perform after hearing Uddhav Gita. And this narration is being spoken by who? By Shukdev Goswami to Parikshit Maharaj. So Shukdev Goswami for 7 days, 7 nights is reciting Srimad Bhagavatam to Parikshit Maharaj, who is fasting for 7 days continuously until death. And later on, this whole narration of Srimad Bhagavatam was recited by Sutta Goswami at Naimisharanya to the great sages, whose spokesperson is Shaunaka Rishi. So having built the context, let's continue. So from earth, Avadhut Brahman had described that one can learn to be sober and tolerant. From air, one can understand to be uncontaminated. Even though air carries aroma or a stink, a bad smell, yet it is, undisturbed. It continues to stay undisturbed. So similarly, we in Krishna consciousness can stay undisturbed by, even in auspicious or inauspicious situations, even when there is, miseries coming, or even when there is good karmas, the good happiness or reactions of our pious activities are coming. So in the reactions of good or bad, pious or impious, sinful activities, the reactions come, and in both situations, one can stay uncontaminated, just like air stays uncontaminated, stays undisturbed. The sky, though it pervades all substances, it is both, indivisible as well as imperceptible. So similarly, like a saintly person stays, determined in Krishna consciousness. So that's the lesson we can learn. Water is naturally clear; it purifies from the very touch. So similarly, when we engage in Krishna consciousness, so again there is Shastra, book Bhagavata, and a devotee Bhagavata. So there are two types of Bhagavata. So the Shastra talks about Lord Shri Krishna's and his devotees, wonderful pastimes. And a devotee also talks about Lord Krishna and his devotees' pastimes. So loving exchanges are the main, transaction that is being discussed, the sweet pastimes. And so just like the water flows naturally making very melodious sound, similarly Krishna's katha is very melodious to the ears of all living entities. So when I say living entities, even though they are conditioned, they may feel sometimes envious of Krishna, yet at the same time if they can remove this envy. Srila Narottam Das Thakur says that this envy cannot be used in Krishna consciousness. So once one is relieved of the envy, then the message can go all the way to the soul residing in the heart of each material body. And there, the living entity, the soul, can experience transcendental bliss. And it's getting nourished, not just physically, but also spiritually. And fire devours all things. So similarly, a saintly person who is firmly situated in Krishna consciousness can face auspicious and inauspicious situations, favorably, as Krishna desires. Moon, even though it changes shapes, it is unchanging, right? Because it's only the reflection of light that is showing us that the moon is changing shape. So similarly, even though there are various changes of the body happening, the 6 changes, and also that living entity is taking on different bodies birth after birth in this material world, 8.4 million, categories of species that are there. So getting different bodies, the living entity is same, not different. So living entity, the soul does not change. So that is from moon. And from sun, Abdul Brahman is describing that sun avoids entanglement and it's undivided. So even though it may appear in many reflections and appear to be divided, but is in reality undivided. And various examples were discussed as how one should not feel that Lord has divided himself or that the living entity divides himself, but rather, does not entangle in the dealing of this conditioned life, rather carries out one's prescribed duties and continue to engage in Krishna consciousness in devotional service. So today we'll be covering the 4 gurus: python, ocean, moth and honeybee. So as we heard in this particular verse, python, it just accepts what comes on its own accord. So similarly, a saintly person accepts, does not over-endeavor, accepts, rather takes to Krishna consciousness, engages in devotional service and accepts whatever comes by its own accord. If a saintly person gets prasadam, they are still engaged in devotional service. If they don't get prasadam, they are still engaged in devotional service. Now from that particular perspective, Srila Prabhupada, and of course in the purport by his disciples, many wonderful instructions have been given. One is, a saintly person should not behave like, he's fallen like a python on the road, or try to make a show off that he is acting like a python and calling out that, see, I'm not, complaining, I'm not getting anything. But in reality, by calling this out, they are actually complaining, right? So a saintly person does not complain. Rather, he accepts whatever is the situation they are facing. And without calling about their situation, they like to call out to Lord Shri Krishna. So they stay undisturbed. So sometimes when we say that a devotee is always happy, then they are materially not affected. But spiritually, there are 2 levels of anxiety even a devotee feels. And this anxiety is world apart than the material anxiety. The first is, a devotee is par dukkha dukhi. He becomes unhappy seeing other unhappy or other suffering. One simple example is that of Arjun. Arjun, in the first chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, he got bewildered, and because he was looking at the 2 armies, observing the 2 armies, he was seeing that all his spiritual master Dronacharya, his instructing spiritual master is there. His grandfather Bhishma Pitama is there, and his brothers and brethren, all of them are there, right? All his families and relatives and friends, all are gathered there. And many of them would die. So with the body, we get various upadhis, right? So one of his upadhi was that he was a Kshatriya. So this is his one position. Then another position is that he is a disciple, right? He is a student of Dronacharya. Another upadhi he had, another position he had was, he is a grandson of Bhishma Pitama. Another he had was, he is a brother of the Kauravas, like cousins, right? He is a cousin of Kauravas, and he is also brothers of so many, the Pandavas, the other Pandavas. And he had so many friends in his gathering. He had his uncles, so he was nephew of so many of them. And in some cases he was father, right, of Abhimanyu. And Draupadi had 5 sons. So again, he had so many conflicting positions, and these positions conflicted with each other. His duty, prescribed duty as a Kshatriya, and his duties with respect to the body as a father, as a brother, as a cousin, as a nephew, as a student, they all conflicted here. And so this caused bewilderment, and so he seems to be in anxiety. So, but this is only external, while Lord Krishna lifts him above the various designations that he has from based on his body, lifts him to his spiritual consciousness and makes him realize that we are spirit soul, right? We are the living entities as spirit soul, and there is only one duty. Jivera Swarupoya Krishna Natyadas. So the only duty of a living entity is to serve Lord Shri Krishna, because the natural position, the constitutional position of a living entity is as an eternal servant of Lord Shri Krishna. And it was Lord Shri Krishna whose desire was that Arjuna should get up and fight as a Kshatriya. And he also tells him that don't worry, your teacher Dronacharya, your grandson Bhishma Pitama, they have been pious people and they are great devotees, so of course their destination will be spiritual abode. And you should be happy that they would be getting spiritual body after this life. And so he became calm after hearing the instructions. Now that is Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna receives instructions. But where that Bhagavad Gita stops, this Uddhav Gita starts, where Uddhav is already a pure devotee of Lord Shri Krishna. And Lord Krishna is going back home, back to Godhead, but he is not taking Uddhav. So Uddhav is saying, how will I? I'm also. So he is putting himself in humble situation. He is acting very humble, saying that I am still associating, I am still relating myself with this body, thinking that I am your cousin, I am your servant and I get to serve you. But he is actually a pure devotee already. And he says, how will I be able to stay behind without you? I would be constantly lamenting. So that is the second level of anxiety, which is in separation from Lord Shri Krishna. A devotee becomes anxious when he is separated from Lord Shri Krishna. And Lord Krishna reminds him that always thinking of me, taking my instructions and remembering me all the time. So by remembering the name, form, activities, pastimes of Lord Shri Krishna, he is saying that you would stay stable. And how to stay carefree, not be disturbed by the various auspicious and inauspicious activities that people will be performing and things will be coming your way. Some auspicious, some inauspicious. How to stay stable, how to stay humble, how to be tolerant, how to not be seeking any respect, yet at the same time ready to give all respects to others. How to be able to carry out your duties in your life successfully. And take this message to the great sages at Badrika Ashram, including Narayan Rishi. Why? Because Lord Krishna wanted to impart these instructions to Narayan Rishi, would be satisfy their heart. So they had been waiting for Lord Krishna's blessings. There are plenary explanations again of Lord Shri Krishna, yet at the same time they are waiting for these instructions. Just like Vishnu, Mahavishnu, in Karan Ocean, he was waiting to see Lord Krishna, so he was abducting the Brahmana's sons. He abducted 10 of the Brahmana's sons because he was so anxious to see Lord Shri Krishna, right? So even Lord Krishna's expansions want to see him. What to talk about we living entities. So we should take this, lesson that how Uddhav is feeling anxiety and Lord Krishna is giving this account of a historical account, a historical narration of an incident that happened where the great king Yadu Maharaj, he meets with Avduta Brahman. And again, a primary portion of Lord Shri Krishna, Lord Dattatreya. And Lord Dattatreya is telling him about his 24 instructing spiritual masters. So, we can have many instructing spiritual masters, but only one initiating spiritual master. So he's talking about the instructing spiritual masters, and it's not that these spiritual masters spoke to him, rather using his intelligence, Lord Dattatreya took instructions from these spiritual masters. And even from that perspective, it's very important to understand that we have to use this intelligence very carefully. Reminds me of a story where a teacher was, wanting to tell his students how bad alcohol is, right? Intoxication. So he brings to the class a bottle of whiskey and he pours a little whiskey in a glass. And the kids are like, is he going to drink? Is he going to share? What's going to be the next move? And what he does is, the teacher, just for the sake of this example, that how bad it is, he puts a bug, he puts an insect, a crawling insect in this glass. And the insect, first trying to swim and then showing, not able to survive different kind of actions, and finally dies and sinks at the bottom of the class. And teacher is asking the students, so what do you learn? So there was a kid, he was always drinking. He immediately raises his hand, and the teacher is very happy. Oh, this kid got it. He understood what I'm trying to tell. He says, yes, what is it? What did you learn from this? And the student got up. He says, by drinking whiskey, alcohol, all the insects in our stomach, they die. He got it completely wrong, right? The message is that it actually causes our death, and it actually is also a spiritual death for us. It's not just physically that we would die by taking intoxication, but also spiritually. It's also, in Yajurveda, it is referred to as an Ishopanishad, that killer of the soul, one who's not engaged in Krishna consciousness. And by intoxicating our body, this is what we would cause, we'll be killing our soul. We would be setting ourselves to the hellish destinations, which would lead to many tribulations and lot of suffering. So we should not do that. So that's the important message, and we should use the intelligence with the right perspective. So even bewildered person can look at the various instructions incorrectly, use the intelligence incorrectly, just like the current philosophers and scientists, when their intelligence has been stolen away by Maya, the material energy, lost illusory energy. Devi Hieshan Gudamai. He says this material energy is mine. She's serving him, serving Lord Shri Krishna. And from the story of Python, as Avdut Brahman, he is describing that a saintly person should not use this example of a Python to make a show that he is starving his body and is going through all these austerities and performing penances and how great he is, trying to project that to the general populace, to the innocent populace, and misleading them to serve him in the due course of time, because that is not the purpose. And also, the example of Python is for our improvement we should take, not for the show. So for our improvement, which is that we should not become disturbed whether happiness comes our way or whether distress comes our way. So a saintly person is not disturbed when he gets prasadam, when he doesn't get prasadam. He takes it, this is the wish of the Lord. And when Parikshit Maharaj is hearing it, he is smiling, he is feeling transcendental bliss because he accepted Lord's will. So the example of a Python is to accept Lord's will. Now Srila Prabhupada, he gave an example from Chanakya's teachings as how the financial institutions, especially banks, they also act like they also use the ajgar pravritti, right, the nature of a Python. And he gave this example, how does a Python live in this world? A Python basically doesn't know how to make a home, doesn't have hands or legs, literally crawls, and cannot just dig the earth or anything. So what happens is, if ants, they make this bambi, right? Then the python goes and lives in that bambi and eats up the ants if they are there. And similarly, when a mouse, he makes a hole. So a mouse works very hard using its teeth and hands and legs, its limbs, to make a hole in the ground. And now that it's very tired, after resting a while, it's very hungry, right? After working so hard to make a house, goes out and tries to find food. And mouse has this another habit. It eats the food and then it stores in its cheeks for later, to eat later. So what the python does is, comes, goes inside the hole, and in the dark place, opens his mouth and goes to sleep, as if it's in meditation. Now from outside, it's not visible that he has gone inside because he's in the dark hole. And mouse, he eats sumptuously, looking for food. And he also stores a lot in his cheeks. And now it's tired, he wants to sleep, so he remembers It remembers the hole it has just made. So enters the hole into the mouth of the python, and python just closes its mouth. Srila Prabhupada gave this example that the banks are like that. They give loan to people, mortgage, that's what you call it. Mortgage. So mortgage means, mortgage is until death, engagement until death. So the literal meaning of the word mortgage is an engagement until death. So people work very hard to pay off this mortgage. And the interesting thing is, bank has actually received money from people all around the world as, to store, to bank. And using that, it has government support to give mortgage of certain amount. So based on people's money, it lends money. And people sign up these mortgage agreements. So there's working for the banks until death, and the moment they fail to give any payment, then bank starts giving notices and then basically takes away their home as well. So first got all the wealth from them, got all the payments for them, and afterwards if they are feeling weak or if they're tired, they want to sleep like the mouse, then takes away the homes also from them, while having done nothing but sitting at one place. Have you ever seen bank walking around? No. You go to bank. So just like that, python is sleeping in the hole, just waiting for people to enter. And that's why the mercantile class is very intelligent in India especially. It is Brahmins, first of all, they don't have to take any mortgage. They just surrender to Lord Shri Krishna and they serve in devotional service, because that's the main purpose of a Brahman. And if some are bewildered and they take on to other occupation, then they fall in this trap of the banks and trying to mortgage and so forth. Kshatriyas are administrators, so they have to engage and they get bewildered. But the mercantile and community is very intelligent, that they understand that never take mortgage. In India, this was a trend. My father taught me that taking, money is like putting yourself on fire. So there are two ways, the fire on the house and taking money, in any form, any kind of debt. These are both like fire, they burn you. So they should be immediately taken care of. If you don't take care of them immediately, then they will burn you down. So one of the instructions that we get, even from the Shastra says, and Chanakya Pandit also reveals, and Srila Prabhupada said that Chanakya has given Niti Shastra how to deal in this material world. And Srila Prabhupada used it in Krishna consciousness, how a devotee behaves. So we take these lessons to understand that in this material world there is padam padam yat vipdam datesham. A devotee doesn't want to stay at a place where there is danger at every step. And in this material world, that is what is going on. So mercantile community, they don't take, they at least not used to take. Now people, they are being bewildered by the flowery words of these salespersons and representatives who are trying to say, how can you do this, how can you do that? Well, you can do this. The only thing is you have to be determined and don't get bewildered. And so intelligence has to be used very carefully, because if you don't use intelligence very carefully, then Lord Krishna gives this instruction in Bhagavad Gita. Krodad bhavati sammoha, sammoha smriti vibhramaha, smriti bhramsad buddhinasho, buddhinashat pranashyati. Krodad, so again, anger, causes delusion, bewilderment. And because of bewilderment, one's memory is vibhrama. Vibhrama is bewilderment of memory happens. And in that state, when the memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. And when intelligence is lost, one falls down into this material pool. And how does anger arise? Kamesha, Krodesha, Rajoguna, Samudbhava, Mahashano, Mahapapma, Vidyayena miha vairinam, Kamesha, Krodesha. So because of lust, one is seeking things, various accomplishments, various goals they are chasing in this material world, then because of that lusty desire and of course greed goes hand in hand. And not getting the things, one becomes angry. And this anger is in the mode of, so lust is in the mode of passion, anger is in the mode of ignorance. So one further falls down. And Srila Prabhupada again and again gives instruction, one has to at least rise to the mode of goodness. So when we use our intelligence, we need to use intelligence very carefully. Because where there is will, there is way. So if you are using your intelligence to advance materially, then you would engage it in material pursuit and you will lose in the long run. Trying to become happy, you will become more and more unhappy and distressed, distressful. So here, that's one of the lessons that Python teaches, that one continues to perform the prescribed duties, one continues to engage in devotional service, one continues to follow the regulative principles. Now, when I say regulative principles, you could say, wait a minute, we didn't talk about it. So again, what happens if somebody is bewildered? How can one establish their intelligence? So we'll discuss at length, but basically, a person who's satisfied in Krishna consciousness, established in Krishna consciousness, the three modes of material energy, they do not affect such a person. So he transcends such state, and the intelligence gets soon established. And when the intelligence is established, one can suitably work in the right manner. Now the lesson from the 10th instructing spiritual master ocean is that an ocean does not overflow or it does not dry out. So an example is given is when an ocean, the rivers in the summer season, the rivers dry out. So the ocean is not getting sufficient supply while the sun is hot. So even though the sun is hot and evaporating a lot of water from the ocean doesn't make, the ocean does not dry out. It stays where it is. So if you go to the beach, you will still see whether with whatever the season it is, the ocean is behaving similarly. The tides are coming and the rise of the ocean is accordingly. It's only during hurricanes where the wind pushes it off the shore, onto the shore. That is a different thing. But an ocean on its own does not dry out and does not overflow. Have you ever heard ocean flooded the land? Well, it was because of the hurricanes, the winds, and those caused it, the cyclones caused it. Not by the ocean on its own. It's the effect of the air, the wind. And similarly, during the time when the rivers are flooded, they overflow in the winter season, and they are pouring so much water in the ocean. Ocean, again, does not overflow. So an ocean does not dry out or overflow. So similarly, when a saintly person is praised or when he is even insulted, he takes it, on behalf of Krishna. Now the interesting thing is this, a devotee does not take any offense when somebody is insulting a devotee. He just stays quiet and prays to Lord Shri Krishna and feeling sympathetic towards the people who are insulting him or giving him trouble. An example that can be given is that of Jesus Christ. When he was being crucified, he said, "My dear Father, please forgive this. They do not know what they are doing." So he was very mercifully, as a saintly son of Christ, he's praying. So this is where we, even Srila Prabhupada said, consider Jesus as one of the acharyas. And he always said that he is son of God, right? And Krishna is known as Christo in the Middle East and Christ in the West. So it's the same name, or same personality, just happen to be different names. And Lord has unlimited names, right? So an ocean does not dry out when there is honor or dishonor. So very similar to Python. So the mood is coming that one has to stay undisturbed. And Srila Prabhupada gave this example. He was walking on the, beach in California, and Pacific Ocean is there. So Srila Prabhupada said, "You see the ocean? It looks so attractive." Srila Prabhupada, when he was saying, the devotees agreed, yes, yes. And he said, why does it seem so calm and attractive? And everyone was thinking, then Srila Prabhupada revealed, because it's deep. So that's how a saintly person has to be. Deep, right? Grave, That's a quality of a saintly person. It's not that a saintly person is saying, so I'm so tolerant, I'm tolerating all your obnoxious behavior, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. No, that's not a behavior of a saintly person. He's not propagating to the world that he's so tolerant, he's so tolerant. He's never doing that. Rather, he's staying grave, he's staying determined in Krishna consciousness. Effect that's coming from outside, like that of rivers flowing with unlimited desires and unlimited happenings and miseries, does not affect a saintly person. A saintly person is grave in his very nature. So that is an important aspect one should learn. And if a saintly person receives prasadam or doesn't receive prasadam, is not affected. He takes just enough to stay healthy and survive, just for the focus of survival. And it does not over-endeavor in any of these directions. Rather, he is ready to do over-endeavor in service of Lord Krishna. So that is there, yes. All activities are oriented in pleasing Lord Shri Krishna. So that is the mood of a saintly person. So this is the lesson we get. These are some of the lessons we get from ocean. And now the lesson from moth is that moth is attracted by its sight, right? And men also are attracted by the sight. And so moth, when it looks at light, a flame, a burning flame, like especially in the case of a candle, example is given in Shastra, when you're burning a candle, the flame of the candle, when there is fire, moth just rushes into the fire because it's getting attracted, it's getting mesmerized by this fire, as if hypnotized, driven by a ghost, and it's just diving into the fire and burning itself. So that is because of our senses, they become attached at times and causes bewilderment. And in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna reveals it. Indriyanam hi charatam yanmano anavidhyate tad asya harati pragyam vayurnavam vivambhasi. As a strong wind sweeps away the boat, the way it feels like in its direction on the water. Even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses, right, can carry away a man's intelligence. So again, from the example of a chariot, where the senses are said to be the horses, and mind is the reins, intelligence is the charioteer, and the soul is the passenger. On this chariot, if one of the horses is driving very strongly in a given direction, and the rein is not able to contain it, rather gets driven by it. So above the senses is mind, above the mind is intelligence, above the intelligence is soul. But then the senses become so strong at the bottom that they drive away mind. So they cause delusion, they get deluded. The senses get bewildered. So that's where we heard earlier that when the senses get bewildered in delusion, the bewilderment of memory happens. So the mind gets bewildered. So it drives away. The rein pulls away from the hands of the intelligence, is not able to control. So that is weakness of heart. And just like in the case of moth rushing into the fire and burning and losing its life, a human being attracted by a beauty of a woman. So a man being attracted by the beauty of a woman, her beautiful forms, her beautiful glances, her smiling ways, wearing, golden ornaments, wearing nice clothes, and making certain gestures can drive away the mind of a man. Same thing from opposite sex perspective. A very powerful looking, attractive man can drive away the mind of a woman. So a bewilderment of memory can happen, and one can lose their compose and causes fall down. And in the purport it's given that this characteristic of human beings is being exploited by the pornographic industry, industry, where they are using this tendency of people who are weak at heart, whose intelligence easily gets bewildered, whose memory gets bewildered, to lure them away and causing them to fall down. So one should take this lesson from the case of a moth, that not to let the senses drive away. And in the case of moth, it's about sight.
And it is said that women get driven more away by the hearing of sounds. Of course, sight also affects them to some. And men get a lot of affected. And our senses burn when we engage in this material world with the sense objects, when we try to engage with various sense objects. And to pacify the senses, we should look at the beautiful form of Sheshi Radha Madan Mohan. Beautiful form of Sheshi Radha Shyam Sundar. We should look at the beautiful form of Sheshi Radha Govindji. And all these names itself, Govind means the one who gives pleasure to the senses. Madan Mohan, one who can even entice, even attract Madan, Cupid. Shyam Sundar, one who has this beautiful form, the bluish form, which is so beautiful, Sundar. So one should look at Shishi, Radha, Krishna. Krishna means one who is all attractive. By seeing the beautiful form of the deities, by remembering the Lord's activities, name, form, activities, pastimes, and by chanting the holy name, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, one can easily be pacified. So that's the example we get from moth, that one should be very careful. Honeybee. So there are two kinds of honeybee. So the 12th Guru, Avadhut Brahman, Lord Dattatreya is discussing and narrating to King Yadu is that a honeybee, there are two types. The bumblebee is the one which is like the black big body, which has a small yellow mark on its shoulder, and that's why it's also refers to at times as Lord Krishna. So because of the dark complexion, Pitambar is a common word used for both of them, Lord Krishna as well as the bumblebee. And a bumblebee has this characteristics that it takes little parag, right, honey from different flowers, and just takes enough to satisfy itself, does not overeat and does not store. So that's the behavior of a saintly person. The instruction is for a saintly person, an avdhuta, a carefree person, a devotee of Lord Shri Krishna. How can he be carefree? But going for madhukari. Madhukari is like going from home to home asking for little food to be given. So in Vrindavan area, madhukari is being performed by various devotees of the Lord, and they go out from house to house asking for madhukari. Madhukari is like, and people are so welcoming, they invite the devotees and they give them nice prasadam, whatever they have, So it's not that they should be fed sumptuously, but rather whatever little they have, they get enough, and as soon as they feel satisfied, right, not overeating, as soon as they feel that this is sufficient, they stop. Just like the case of a bumblebee. And there are various instructions given, especially to brahmacharis, that one should not keep going to the same house again and again, saying that from this house we get nice madhukari or nice prasadam we get. Because that would cause distress on that household over a period of time. The idea is that you would go different house. And the Sad Goswamis, they set the example, they did not even sleep under the same tree. They would change the place where they would be sleeping. And of course the kutir was there where they were doing bhajan kutir, where people were gathering, hearing to their bhajans, glorification of Lord Shri Krishna's, his name, form, activities, pastimes. So that is very important, that madhukari should not be, and one who should not become a chubby bee by over endeavoring. So overeating should also not be the mood. So that should also be taken care of. And should not become a chubby bee, because that would also cause fall down. Now the other kind of honeybee is, example is given with respect to the honey thief. So we'll discuss that. That's going to be the 14th Guru that we'll be discussing. So here, today we discuss story from, the instructions from Python. The instruction one should take is that one should not be, disturbed when one is not getting what, proper prasadam or proper treatment. Everything is coming on its own. And in this translation, it was very nicely given that one can be even unhappy when in heavenly planets, right? So happiness and unhappiness, distress, they are not related to the position. They are a state of mind. And if we are not stable, if we are not focused in Krishna consciousness, then we cannot be prasanna all the time. We cannot be happy. And we can feel unhappiness. We can feel distressed, even in a very opulent situation. That's why we see so many times, even Princess Diana, she was committing suicides and she was doing so many attempts and she was so unhappy because even though in an opulent situation, she could not control her mind. So we have so many examples from history where people have been so stressful and so unhappy, even though they had, people believe that they had all the happiness, all the facilities of this world. We can see the examples from Bollywood, Hollywood, there are so many of them. Numerous, you cannot even list them. That's how people become unhappy. While in the state of taking the instruction for Python, one can stay stable, undisturbed. And similarly with the example of ocean, right? The sea and ocean, they don't overflow, they don't. So even though there is honor or dishonor coming, people stay undisturbed. Even though there are different kind of relative situations happening, one should stay stable. And the example of a moth, one should not get lured away by the senses, when interacting with the sense objects. Should not meditate on the sense objects, rather meditate on Rishikesha and serving Lord Shri Krishna. He is the master of the senses, and by serving the master of the senses, one can be always happy and stable. And then with the example of honeybee, just a saintly person takes just enough to survive and does not engage in over endeavor. But whatever comes, there is another instruction coming from Srila Prabhupada, is whatever devotee gets by Lord's mercy, he uses everything, he or she, they use everything, a devotee uses everything in Lord's service. So not for one's sense gratification, but rather in Lord's service, in devotional service. And that should be the goal. The process is devotional service, and once you attain the love of Godhead, you engage in continuing serving Lord Shri Krishna. So the devotional service continues. It's also the process, and sometimes also refers to as a goal. So those are some of the lessons we learned from these 4 instructing spiritual masters today. So this is part 1 of 18th chapter, 11th canto, the story of Piṅgalā. Hare Krishna.